10 groups, 1 microphone, and not enough room for all of them to survive. Contracts signed in good faith, friendships forged in rehearsal rooms, harmonies built from brotherhood. Then the money came, then the fame came, and everything fell apart. Ego, greed, lawsuits, silence where there used to be music. By the time we reach number 1, you won't believe what they did to each other. Let's go. Number 10, the Platters. 5 voices, 1 name, and a war over who owned it. Only you. Before Motown, before soul had a name, the Platters were there. 5 voices rising together out of Los Angeles in the early 1950s, threading harmonies so smooth they felt like silk pressed against the ear. Make all this world seem right. Only You, The Great Pretender, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, these were not just songs, they were emotional architecture. And only you. Tony Williams led with a tenor that could make a grown man weep in a crowded room, and the world listened. By the late 1950s, the Platters had charted more hits than almost any black group in America. They played to integrated audiences at a time when that alone was an act of rebellion. They were history walking. But beneath the elegance, there was a man controlling everything. With love for only. Their manager, Buck Ram. Ram had trademarked the name, not the members, the name. And when Tony Williams, the voice that made the Platters who they were, tried to step into a solo career, he discovered the uncomfortable truth. He could leave, the name could not go with him. Different lineups, different members, same name on the marquee. Audiences paid to see the Platters and got strangers on the stage. The courts were called, the arguments were bitter. Williams spent years fighting for recognition of what he had built, note by note, night by night. Tony Williams died in 1992, his legacy complicated by decades of legal confusion over who the real Platters even were. Multiple groups toured under that name simultaneously. The original members scattered, the hits remained, but the brotherhood gone. That's betrayal. Oh, yes, I'm the... Number 9, the Isley Brothers. Family bound by blood, divided by dollars. Do what you want to do what you want. Few groups in the history of American music matched the longevity and evolution of the Isley Brothers. From gospel roots in Cincinnati to Shout in 1959, through It's Your Thing, through the silken sensuality of Between the Sheets. They were shapeshifters. They survived every decade by becoming whatever that decade needed them to be. And they did it as a family, which made what happened later hurt all the more. The younger brothers, Ernie and Marvin, eventually brought legal action against the older generation over royalties and business decisions. Decades of deferred compensation, decisions made without consent. The family boardroom became the courtroom. Ronald Isley, the voice of the group, found himself entangled not only in internal family conflict, but also in federal tax evasion charges that sent him to prison in 2004. The group fractured and reformed multiple times. The name survived. The warmth did not always survive with it. A family that had harmonized for 50 years could not always agree on who deserved what, and the music that had been built on togetherness became evidence in legal filings. That's betrayal. Number 8, The Temptations. 5 kings and a throne with no room for all of them. On a cloudy day. Motown, Detroit, 1961. 5 men in perfectly pressed suits, stepping into a legacy they could not yet comprehend. David Ruffin, Eddie Kendricks, Paul Williams, Melvin Franklin, Otis Williams. The Temptations were not just a group, They were a standard. My Girl, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, Papa Was a Rolling Stone. Their choreography was military precision. Their harmonies were divine. Can make me feel this way. David Ruffin, the voice, the ego, the tragedy. As the group's profile rose, so did Ruffin sense that he had outgrown the arrangement. He wanted his name above the groups on the marquee. He began missing shows. He showed up late, sometimes unable to perform. The drugs came quietly and then loudly. Sunshine on a cloudy day with my... Berry Gordy made the call. Ruffin was fired in 1968. He never fully recovered. David Ruffin died in 1991 of a drug overdose, largely broke. Paul Williams, battling alcoholism and chronic pain, died by his own hand in 1973 in a car just blocks from Motown's offices. The group that had represented Black excellence at its most poised had swallowed its own members whole. That's betrayal. I've got the month of May. Number 7, New Edition. They built the machine, then the machine ate them. Boston, 1978. 5 boys from Roxbury who danced like their lives depended on it, because in some ways they did. Bobby Brown, Ralph Tresvant, Ricky Bell, Michael Bivins, Ronnie DeLoe. New Edition arrived before the world was ready and made the world catch up. Candy Girl, Mr. Telephone Man, Cool It Now. They were joy in motion. Their manager, Maurice Starr, had signed them to a contract that paid each member a fraction of what the music earned. By the time the boys understood what they had signed, Starr had already moved on, using the blueprint he built with them to create New Kids on the Block. A white group, a bigger payday. Their sound, their template, handed to someone else. Then Bobby Brown was pushed out. Then the group replaced him with Johnny Gill and kept moving. Then Johnny Gill was set aside when Bobby came back. Then Ralph left. Then the whole thing splintered into Belle Biv DeVoe and solo careers and reunion tours that never quite recaptured what had been lost. If you grew up on this music, if these names mean something to you, this channel was made for you. Every story, every betrayal, every harmony that deserved better. We tell it here. Subscribe if you're with us. New Edition became a case study in what happens when children sign adult contracts and adults look the other way. The VH1 biopic brought the story to a new generation, but the years stolen from them, those never came back. Number 6, the OJs. Philadelphia soul and a silent war over who led it. Philadelphia International Records, Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, the sound of the 1970s, and at the center of it, Eddie Levert, Walter Williams, and the rotating cast that made up the OJs. Backstablished, Love Train, For the Love of Money. These were not just songs, they were prophecies, warnings dressed in funk. The group cycled through members over decades with departures that were rarely clean. William Powell, one of the original members, was diagnosed with cancer and had to step away from performing. He died in 1977. The grief of losing him fractured something in the group's foundation that no amount of chart success could fully repair. And the tensions that came later, over direction, over legacy, over the weight of carrying the name, were felt, if not always spoken. The OJs endured, but endurance is not the same as wholeness. Some wounds leave marks, even when the music keeps playing. That's betrayal. Number 5, on Vogue. Four women, one sound, and a record label that chose profit over people. On Vogue arrived like a thunderclap. Hold On, Don't Let Go, My Lovin', Four Women, Dawn Robinson, Terry Ellis, Cindy Herron, Maxine Jones, who could harmonize, perform, and command a stage with the authority of women twice their years. They were glamour and grit simultaneously. Dawn Robinson left in 1997. The reasons were layered: money, creative control, a sense that her contributions were not being fairly compensated. The label restructured, the group restructured. Members came and went. What had once felt like a unified front became a revolving door. Interviews turned cold. Comments became pointed. The sisterhood frayed publicly. In Vogue never fully recaptured the commercial heights of their peak. Various lineups toured. Legal disputes over who could use the name arose. Four women who had stood side by side at the top of the world spent years standing apart. Number 4, The Supremes. Two women, one spotlight, and a corporation that chose a favorite. She said, Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, Florence Ballard, 3 girls from the Brewster housing projects in Detroit who climbed into the machinery of Motown and emerged as the most successful American vocal group of the 1960s. Stop in the Name of Love, Come See About Me, You Can't Hurry Love. They were the crown jewel of Berry Gordy's empire. They were everything. But Berry Gordy had chosen Diana. The billing changed. Diana Ross and the Supremes, a decision that publicly diminished Mary and Florence before a word had been spoken. Florence Ballard, one of the founding members, the woman whose voice had anchored the group from the beginning, was fired in 1967. The official reason was missed performances. The unofficial truth was more complicated. Personal struggles, disagreements with Gordy, and the suffocating sense that she had been made irrelevant in something she had helped create. Florence Ballard died in 1976 at 32 years old, on public assistance, essentially broke. The woman who had stood at the center of one of the most celebrated groups in music history died largely forgotten by the industry that had used her. Mary Wilson spent the rest of her life telling Florence's story so it would not be erased. Mary died in 2021. Diana Ross, the chosen one, remains a star. Number 3, Boyz II Men. The most successful R&B group of the era, and the manager who nearly broke them. Philadelphia Again, 1991. Motown Philly, then End of the Road, then I'll Make Love to You, then One Sweet Day with Mariah Carey, a record that sat at number 1 for 16 consecutive weeks. Boyz II Men were not just popular, they were a cultural phenomenon. 4 young men who brought classic harmony into the era of New Jack Swing and made it feel essential. Their original manager, Michael Bivins of New Edition, had discovered them and guided their early rise. But as the money grew, so did the questions. Disputes over management fees, disputes over creative direction, legal separations that were never entirely clean. The group also faced the devastating loss of Michael McCary, their bass vocalist, who left in 2003 due to multiple sclerosis, and a soured relationship with the remaining members that was never fully repaired publicly. McCary's departure was not just a personnel change, it was a fracture in a brotherhood that had been built on trust. He had been there from the beginning. His voice was in the architecture of their greatest records. And then he was gone, sick, separated, and silent on the details of what had happened between them. Number 2, TLC, the best-selling female group in American history, and they filed for bankruptcy. Atlanta, 1991. Three women who rewrote what a girl group could look like, sound like, and stand for. Tyon T-Boz Watkins, Lisa Left Eye Lopez, Rosanda Chili Thomas. They wore condoms on their clothing as a statement. They rapped about self-worth before it was fashionable. Creep, Waterfalls, No Scrubs, Unpretty. Crazy Sexy Cool sold over 15 million copies in the United States alone. They were monumental. And then they filed for bankruptcy in 1995, at the height of their fame, because the contracts they had signed with their label, LaFace Records, paid them a fraction of what the music generated. Their manager, Pebbles, had structured deals that enriched the infrastructure around them, while the women themselves struggled to pay their bills. Left Eye, brilliant and volatile and deeply wounded, burned down the home of her boyfriend Andre Rison in 1994. She was fracturing in public, and no one in power chose to stop and ask why. Lisa Left Eye Lopez died in the car accident in Honduras in 2002. She was 30 years old. She had spent her final years searching for something the industry had never given her: peace, equity, a sense of being truly valued. The group had fought their label, fought their management structure, fought to simply be compensated fairly for music that made everyone around them rich. That's betrayal. Number 1, the Jackson 5, the Jacksons. The greatest family in pop and soul history, and the father who cast the longest shadow. Gary, Indiana. 5 boys, a father with ambition sharp enough to cut glass. Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and Michael. The Jackson 5 debuted on Motown in 1969 and immediately became something the world had never seen. I Want You Back, ABC, I'll Be There. Michael was 11 years old and singing about love with the conviction of a man who had lived 3 lifetimes. The world fell in love instantly and completely. But behind the choreography and the matching suits was a family held together by fear as much as love. Joe Jackson, their father and manager, drove their children with a discipline that crossed into cruelty. Michael spoke of it in fragments over the years: the belt, the rehearsals that lasted until they collapsed, the constant threat of punishment if they failed to perform. They were not children, they were products. When the family moved from Motown to Epic Records, Jermaine, married to Berry Gordy's daughter, stayed behind. A brother left on the platform while the train pulled away. The family fractured along that fault line for years. And Michael, the most gifted of them all, began the long process of becoming something separate from the family name entirely. Thriller arrived in 1982 and made him not just the biggest star in the world, but a man standing alone on a mountain too high for anyone else to reach. Joe Jackson's control did not loosen with distance or success. The damage had already been done, quietly, daily, in rehearsal rooms in Gary and Los Angeles, when these boys were too young to understand what was being taken from them. Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009. He was 50 years old. He died in debt, in isolation, surrounded by people paid to be near him, preparing for a comeback tour he was physically not capable of surviving. The boy who had once sung "I'll Be There" with his brothers had spent the last decades of his life largely alone. Won't you please stay? Joe Jackson attended the public memorial. He gave interviews about upcoming business ventures before his son was in the ground. The brothers reunited periodically, for tours, for tributes, but the family that had once represented something beautiful about Black excellence and collective love had been hollowed out from the inside, not by the industry alone, but by the man who was supposed to protect them. The music was eternal. The childhood was not. And sometimes, the most devastating betrayal does not come from a stranger with a contract or a label with an agenda. Sometimes it comes from the person who was supposed to love you first. The voices remain, the harmonies endure. But behind every perfect note in this story, there was a human being who deserved better than what the people closest to them chose to give them. Remember the music and remember the cost.
In the evening, I wanna rock, every day and I